Hello, I'm the Grub Street Lodger, and good morning. I don't normally make these first thing in the morning, so I'm here with my lovely Samuel Johnson cup. It's a little bit warm, but I thought I'd start the day off talking about the books I have read in September. It's been a good month. So, the first book I read was The Door by Magda. I'm going with Jarbo. I read Abigail a few months ago, and I really liked it, so I thought, let's find more Magda Jarbo. And so this is probably one of her most famous works in the English language. It's translated. It's about a woman who was a writer who was blacklisted in Hungary, as was Magda Jarbo, and has been reinstated, as she has. And now that she's going again with her writing, she hires someone to look after her house. And this someone is Emerance. And Emerance is an older woman, and she is fierce and she is strong. She's very mysterious. What I like most about her is that she has a dignity to her. So she isn't interviewed about being a cleaner. She essentially interviews the person she's going to clean the house off, see if it's worth her while. And she's so strong, she becomes like a centre of the community. Everybody asks her for advice or goes to her when they got problems. She's extremely generous. She goes around giving food to anyone who's sick. And then there were all these mysterious stories and rumours. And it starts to come out that she essentially harboured anyone who needed harbouring. So she hid Jews from Nazis, she hid Nazis from Soviets, and she hid Soviets from other Soviets who were doing coups on them. So she's sort of instinctively, not even caring, but she instinctively protects people. And the narrator becomes very impressed and enamoured with her, and very sort of obsessed with her. And there's a thing about her. No one goes into her little flat. The door is shut, and no one has ever seen the other side of the door. A little bit of a spoiler for this book. By the end of it, Emerance has not been coming out for a little bit, and they begin to wonder if she's sick, and they have to make a decision. Do they break through the door, essentially destroying the dignity and self-sufficiency in which Emerance has held herself through her whole life? Or do they leave the door and have her possibly die? And that's kind of the moral crux of the book. And the main character chooses the worst possible way of doing everything. So it's not a very jolly book. It's a very gripping one. I really liked The Door. That was good. The next book I read was by another author I've been really getting into, Elizabeth von Arnim. This book was called Fräulein Schmidt and Mr. Anstruther. And it's a novel in letters, an epistolary novel, but you only get one half of the letters. You get the letters from Fräulein Schmidt to Mr. Anstruther. And so she is the poor daughter of a academic, and they live with her stepmom in the university town of Jena, where Goethe used to go, and it was a big centre of things around about that time. And an Englishman has stayed with them for a year to learn German, and just as he's been about to leave, he's declared love for Fräulein Schmidt. Her name is Rosemarie. It's probably not Rosemarie, because that's more French. It's probably Rosemarie, because that's more German. It's very mean to Germans. Sorry, Germans. So yeah, so Rosemarie has the first letters are her, delighted and surprised because she kind of liked this guy anyway, and now he's declared a love for her. And then, as her letters go on, you start realising that his have become less emphatic and also less regular. And then he starts saying, well, my dad actually doesn't like us as a couple. He's actually set me up with this rich heiress, and I'm going to go be engaged to her now. But instead of the book ending there, she says, right, well, you'll need a friend to talk to about things, and I'll be that friend. And so she carries on giving him advice and responding to whatever he's written. At the same time, her stepmother dies, and it turned out her stepmother was the key to the family's relative wealth. And so now they're very poor, and they go off and they live in sort of a little cottage where she looks after her father, who's writing a book, and she, of course, it being von Arnim, gardens. And so she's beginning to really enjoy this. She's beginning to get sort of self-sufficiency and a sense of herself, in and of herself. Also, she started translating her father's book, but not as literally as he would have liked. And so she's getting the creative output in writing as well. And so she's beginning to find herself. About the same time as Mr. Anstruther is beginning to lose himself, because he's not happy with this rich widow. And then she drops, not rich widow, rich fiancé. And then she drops him, and his letters obviously start turning to him going back to, why did I leave you? Can we get back together? And she essentially just says no. And that's it. That's the end of the book. It's not a love story. It's a finding yourself story. And as such, that was really good. And I really like Rosemary. She had a lot of wisdom to her. But, you know, although intellectually I like the fact it was not a love story, a bit of me wanted a love story. I just wanted a nice story, and it wasn't that. But it was very good. It was a very good book, but, it wasn't going to carry you away in the romance. So the third book I read, was Susanna Clarke's Piranesi, which I put my name down for as soon as I heard it was coming in paperback. I very much enjoyed Mr. Norrell, Doctor Strange and Mr. Norrell, and I liked the Ladies of Grace Adieu, the short story collection, so I was interested to see what this would be. And it's very, very different from Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, in that that book is a big, fat book that plays with form and pretends to be sort of a Victorian book. This is very different. It's told in the first person by somebody called Piranesi, who lives in this almost infinite house. There are clouds up above. There are seas in the lower floors of the house that have these huge tides that go around the corridors. And the house is absolutely full of statues, just full of them everywhere. And he's at one with this house, and he fishes, and he sort of gets spiritual notions from the statues and from the flights of birds that are there. And he's very happy with his life. And he says he's a scientist, and his job is to chart this place and explore this place. But he's a scientist who doesn't ask some very big questions about his life. Namely, he knows he's not called Piranesi. He can't remember what he's called. Also, he has all these journals, and some of the journals have this sort of arbitrary number system, like 2001, 2002, 2003. And then the later journals have his year, the year of crying and wailing, the year I found the albatross, which he likes because he thinks that they make the years more different. And he suddenly thought, I wonder why I changed that. He never properly asked that. He also never properly asks about why the other person who lives in this world, who he calls the other, one, is not around that much, and two, seems to have smart suits and modern technology, and sometimes gives him like new shoes and things. And he doesn't ask these questions. Then there's a third person in the house, and these questions come to the fore. It's really good. The world of this is captivating. I really like this house world. And the mystery behind it you can put together as you're going along. It's good fun. I think there were some big similarities in sort of, not structure or tone or anything like that, but in theme to Jonathan Strange and Dr. Norrell. There's certain magic and fairy worlds you mustn't touch, and two rivals and things like that, but I won't say too much because it's still very new just come out paperback, and it's worth reading just sort of straight up without much of a clue, and it's really good fun. It's probably the most fun book I've read this month. My next book was another Magda Szabó. It's called Katalin Street. And it was very good, but extremely depressing. It's about three families and their experiences from 1935 to 1965. So the rise in sort of authoritarian Hungary and the Nazi occupation, the Soviet occupation, things like that. One of the families is Jewish, so you can kind of imagine what might be going on here. But it's the way it's told. First we go to the end, we go to the 60s, where the survivors of this time are lost. They are lost in this sort of nostalgia that's tinged with bitterness and shame. They cling together even though being together almost punishes them, but not being together punishes them more. They're just sort of dependent on each other now, these people, and just reliving these old times, both in a sense of nostalgia, as we know it today, I wish I could be there, but also in the sense of nostalgia as it originally meant, pain, a physical pain, and a lot of shame. So we get to them, and then we get to one of them who has gone to an island in Greece, and so she's not part of this sort of tight circle, but she's also feeling her own pain. And then we get to a ghost of one of the characters. And the afterlife is very strange in this book, and I think the afterlife reveals what the book's doing, actually. In the afterlife, this ghost can create sort of like a dream version of Katalin Street, in her case, these houses with the families in, and watch things that have happened. She can use this sort of dream house to go and hug, her mum as her mum was and things like that. She can also go into the modern world and the real world and see the real people, how they are now. She can also go physically, but they never recognise her. And then the last thing is she can go and see the people she knew when she was alive as their spirits are now. And this is the weirdest part. Like, she goes to her parents, but most of the time her parents are looking back on their lives. And so she goes to her parents, and many times her parents are kids and toddlers. And she's like, I went to see mum and dad, but, mum was playing peekaboo and dad was wailing in a wet nappy, and it just wasn't the thing. And so the whole of the afterlife is a constant cycle of nostalgia, bitterness and shame. And so is the lives of the characters. And so the implication being when they die, it's just going to be more of the same. And that life and death and everything is a constant cycle of nostalgia, bitterness and shame, which is not cheerful. But it was good and it was gripping. Out of the three Magda Szabó read, I would say that Abigail is my favourite because I like the sort of school story aesthetic. The Door is probably a tighter work and this is a bit looser, but this was more interesting sort of conceptually to me. I really liked this afterlife. Well, I didn't like it. I mean, I'm glad I don't believe in an afterlife because this is the kind of thing I think about afterlives. Do you go there when you were most happiest? What if when someone you love was most happiest was not when you were around? But yeah, very good, very good. That was followed by another book which was also very depressing. And I can't decide whether I really like this book or whether I really don't like this book. It's called Oceans of Time. It's by Merete, Morken, Andersen. It's translated from Norwegian, so I've had two from Hungarian, or Magda, and one from Norwegian. It's actually signed by the author. There we go. Just picked it up. The beginning was utterly shocking. It's very simple declarative sentences, no emotion whatsoever. Describe this 16-year-old girl, and she gets up, she goes away, she has a wee, she washes her hands, she washes her face, she takes her nightie off, she puts on her underwear, then her t-shirt, then her socks, then her trousers, then her coat, then her shoes. She goes downstairs, she drinks a glass of orange juice, she puts it in the dishwasher, she starts the dishwasher so that her mum can wake up to clean dishes. She grabs a rope, she walks out into the wood, she rolls a log over to a tree, she stands on the log, she makes a slip knot, she fastens the rope to the tree, she puts it around her neck, she jumps off, and the whole thing is delivered as unemotionally as everything. As if her having a glass of orange juice is as important to the story as her flinging herself off and strangling herself. And so I was shocked. It was a hell of a way to begin a book. So then after that, we went to her father's point of view, his mind. Pardon me. His name is Johann, and he and his wife, who had this girl, 16-year-old girl who killed herself, they've separated, and he's now got another wife and a 4-year-old girl. And his internal monologue is this: he's driving to the mother's house so that they can talk about funeral arrangements 4 days later. And he's talking to her outright, and he's mainly talking to her about his relationship with the mum and how it carried him away and how it was a complete change his life. But then he realised that it was not only not right, but it was killing him, and that he needed to get out, and that he needed to go and marry this other person instead. He doesn't seem that... I'm not that fond of him. He outright says, "Oh, I think I'm cleverer than everyone around me," and I don't like people that say that. And also, he confuses Nietzsche for a philosopher, and not just a rambling tit. So I don't like anyone who's that into Nietzsche. Well, no, I probably do like him, but I don't respect him. I don't know. It's a flag to me. If someone thinks that Nietzsche is someone worth listening to, then usually they're not worth listening to. And so I didn't much like him. I thought, oh, good. Well, we're going to get on to the mum now, whose name I've forgotten. He's called Johann. I remember that because it was like John but wrong. Judith. She's called Judith, and she's just crazy. Her internal monologue keeps not making sense. She thinks almost entirely in metaphors. He does a lot too. And she seems very clingy and overprotective, and not a very easy person to live with at all. Which is weird, because we've already met her through Johann, and she seemed wonderful, but she's not very wonderful through her own eyes. And then we get a third person part where they meet up. And so at the beginning of the book was this cold, unemotional, flat thing. This is so emotional, over-emotional. She's running around crying like a child, wailing, crawling, sucking her thumb, riding around in a pile of her dead girl's clothes and throwing things at people. He's sort of playing along. They're both just talking about metaphors, pardon, metaphors. Oh, it's the cave with the girl, and the girl in the cave, and the rocks and the waves are receding, and the rocks get carried by the waves, and then, none of it's making any sense. And then the only real adult in the book, the subsequent wife of Johann, turns up, sorts out the bloody details of the funeral that they were supposed to be talking about, while the 4-year-old stepsister tidies up her dead stepsister's clothes. There's also a long suicide note type thing. It's not really a suicide note because it's written for the stepdaughter to read when she's 16, which is like 12 years in the future, which gives absolutely no reason why she's killed herself. I presume it's something to do with the parents' relationship, because they spend so long talking about their relationship. But it's a book here that says they emerge into a new understanding, deals with loss and grief, but also, transformingly, with hope, recovery and love. And I didn't get that. There was no point where they broke through into that and actually made sense of their relationship or their daughter's suicide or any of that. And this is why I don't like the book, because in some ways, a bit like one of the other ones, it makes sense that they have no breakthrough. A tragic thing has happened, and what sense is there? And so the chaos of the book, especially at the end of the book, makes sense. The fact that there isn't a tidy resolution, that they don't break through, that they don't they sort of decide to all live together, which would be terrible. I think the 4-year-old stepdaughter will not even make her 16th birthday. She has to live in that bloody ruckus. And so that feels kind of true. But it does not feel like good storytelling. So, do I say it's a very good book because it had lots of interesting ideas or do I say it's a bad book because it was exhausting and the idea of picking it up and reading it again makes me feel really tired? I don't know. So that's Oceans of Time. Now, the next book I read for the Samuel Johnson book group, who are meeting in person next week. And it was nice. I got to read a nice book, not a miserable book. Some people did die in it, but no one killed themselves for a start. All were killed by Nazis, because Nazis didn't exist. So, Nature's Engraver, The Life of Thomas Buick by Jenny Uglow, or Uglow. I'm not sure which. She's a great biographer. If you've read her Hogarth or you've read The Lunar Men, she can write a biography with the description and the shaping and sort of the gripping writing of a novel. And she does that here. But it has the same, you can trust it the way you could trust an academic work. She has all the sources and all that. So reads really well, but very authoritative also. And Thomas Buick was an engraver. He engraved in wood. And so this book is absolutely covered with just beautiful little illustrations by Buick, as well as, the colour plates that you often get. But just throughout the book, all these beautiful illustrations. And it's very important to have them because that's why he's being celebrated, because he made these beautiful things. So all of that good. Thing about Thomas Buick, though, his life is not that interesting. I mean, I once heard it said that no writers and artists' lives are that interesting, really, unless they're Benvenuto Cellini, because most of them, they're busy writing and drawing and things. They don't get up to much. I don't think that's strictly true. You got Samuel Johnson's battles with himself. You got Goldsmith's weird sort of struggle for independence. You've got all sorts of things, but this read a lot like those 18th century books where it said, if you become an apprentice and you work really hard and you look after your family and you look after your friends and you stay true to your sort of beliefs, you become respectable and you become, you get a lot of money or enough money to live on and everything will be lovely. And that's essentially his life. He talks about how he was a wild child and then going into being an apprentice sort of calmed him down. But he was essentially a middle-class rural person who goes into a middle-class urban trade, works hard and does well. His parents dying was a big impact on him, as indeed it is for everybody. And his younger brother dies quite young of TB, and that was very sad, because actually his brother seemed more interesting as a person than he did. He had a bit of a temper, he used to fall out with people, but he was also very forgiving, so he'd fall out quite violently, and then not, actually, sometimes physically, but a few weeks later, make up again. So it's a not particularly riveting life, but told beautifully, of a man who made beautiful things. So it's sort of interesting to know his life, just to see what sort of life a person would have to make these beautiful things. I love the fact that his most famous thing is a book of birds, and he loved birds, and I love birds. I'm really into birds. And so many birds died to create this book, because he didn't want stuffed ones, because when they're stuffed they all look a bit weird, so he wanted dead ones that he could get the plumage off and stuff. But in doing that, made some absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, look at that blue tip. So this is a very good book, and if you're interested in Thomas Buick and his life, it's the ideal book to have. Just his life wasn't that eventful. Okay. Next, I read another life, or two lives, the lives of Cleopatra and Octavia. And it's written by Sarah Fielding, who wrote The Female Governess, which is the first sort of school story. And she also wrote David Simple, which is a very early sentimental novel. She also wrote this thing called The Cry that I really, really want to get hold of. And this is a very interesting kind of biography. One, it's two biographies. It's Cleopatra, famous Egyptian queen, and Octavia, who was Octavian, or later to be known as Augustus, his sister. And she married Mark Antony, and Mark Antony, of course, went off with Cleopatra. And so it's comparing these two for a didactic end, really. It's saying Cleopatra was self-centered and evil, and her life was horrible. Octavia was loving and giving, and her life was good. That's essentially what it's saying. But it's still a biography, and it's a research biography. And in fact, this edition has a lot of notes telling you where she's getting all her research to prove that, yes, this is a proper research biography to the standards of the time, of the 18th century. But it's told in the first person, as if the ghosts are telling you it. And I'm not quite sure why, because it doesn't use the first person to make stuff up or particularly enliven it, because the ghosts have a passive, objective view of their lives. So the ghost of Cleopatra is sort of going, well, I didn't know it then, but I can see now that my ambition led me to do this, to do. So it's weirdly bloodless. I kind of rate it as an interesting idea that didn't quite come off. And Sarah Fielding, creating the school genre, ahead of the sentimental genre, all these other things. She's clearly someone who likes playing around the edges of genre and such. So good on her for trying it, but it doesn't quite work for me. In fact, the best part of the book was the subscription list. It was really interesting to see, like, Hogarth subscribed, and Saunders Welch, who was a Bow Street runner, worked with her brother, and yeah, it was interesting. The subscription list. There you go. Last book of the month then is called Father. It is by Elizabeth von Arnim again, and this is in this new women's writers series for the British Library, but I wasn't really after that. I was after another von Arnim. That's what I wanted. I want all the von Arnims. This one, although written much later than Fräulein Schmidt and Mr. Anstruther, is closest to that than any of the other ones I've read. In that, in Fräulein Schmidt, she looks after her dad, who's a writer, and she's happy to. In fact, she finds meaningfulness in doing that, and that's what she wants to do, rather than get married to this rich person who's jilted her before. In Father, the main character, Jennifer, is looking after her dad, a writer, when her mum died, and she promised her mum she would do. And it's been utterly stifling and horrible, and he's an ogre, yeah, and he writes these beautiful books about life, but he has no real sense of life. He doesn't seem to do any life, and she's been in prison for 12 years, and she's lost her youth, and she's now 33. She feels that she'll never get married. It's a different age, and just, sort of left on the shelf, as they say. Then, I should really stop doing that. Then Father marries a 19-year-old girl called Nettie, and she thinks, great, now Nettie can look after him. I've done my job, I'm out of here. So she goes off with a very, very meagre yearly income that's been left to her by her mum, and finds a small Sussex cottage that's run by the Reverend James Ollier. And Reverend Ollier and his sister, Alice, have a sort of similar relationship to Father and Jennifer, in that Alice is his older unmarried sister and rules him, and he's cowed under by her. But then there's also the interesting link that Alice is an unmarried woman and that Jennifer is an unmarried woman. So they have a sort of link there. And part of the reason Alice rules her brother is because if he marries, she's going to lose what she's got. And she's terrified of it. And so now we have a sort of a love story between the two, Jennifer and James. But it's von Arnim, so we have lots of humour. We have gardening, of course. We have some very funny stuff. So some weirdly disgusting stuff. She tackles the garden, and she finds loads of snails, and she tosses them over into the churchyard, and there's this huge pile of snails, which is a horrible image. And it ends, I suppose, happily. Someone dies at the end, and I love the description of them dying, because they says that they dropped off to sleep as they wished. But they also dropped off into death, which they probably wouldn't have wished, but didn't really mind because they didn't notice. Which a great way of describing a death. And maybe everything's solved by the end. Maybe it's happy endings all round. But still, the bulk of the book is abusive relationships. It's about a whole range of abusive relationships. But it's done with humour, and it's done with sort of farce. And it does have a happy-ish ending. So, Vera, one of her other books, was about abusive relationship, and it was funnier and I think less happy and nastier. This is a bit toned down from all that. But it was still a very good book. In terms of my von Arnim, out of the 6 I've read, I would say it's probably 4th or 5th. It's the top end of the bottom. I'd actually say Mr. Anstruther, Fräulein Schimdt, Mr. Anstruther is the bottom, only because it wasn't as eventful or funny as some of the others. But there. So yeah, I've had a really good month. I've read quite a few translations and quite a lot of grim stuff, but very well written, observed, interesting grim stuff. So that's worth it. Next month, I'm actually going to do a reading challenge that my sister's doing, that she found off someone else. It's sort of Disney park themed. It's got a proper name. I'll explain it all when I talk about next month's books. Thank you very much.